So, like Dan said, this is a change from my normal style of presentation. But last weekend, I went to Tahoe with some of my PhD friends who are working in my research group. And it was the first time I went skiing in probably over 15 years. I don't even remember the last time I went skiing because I was so small at the time. But I thought I would be really nervous and really afraid to try out skiing again because I've heard it's very hard to pick up and can be very dangerous and everything. But I actually found it very fun, and I was able to pick it up within a day or two, and I got very comfortable with the slopes. And now I think I've caught the skiing bug because I want to ski like every chance I get, every season. So I wanted to share some fun facts about the sport, the way it's evolved over time, and some of the techniques I learned and some of the resorts that you can check out if you're ever interested in picking it up in case you haven't already. So the first thing I want to talk about is how skis evolved from when they were first developed. Skis have actually been around for thousands of years. The first skis were apparently designed around 8000 BC, and they were mainly designed for hunter-gatherer tribes who were trying to navigate snowy terrain in an efficient manner to hunt and gather. But those skis were mainly just meant for traversing terrain, whereas modern skis are meant for going downhill slopes very quickly or even competing in the Olympics, for example. So there's been a lot of evolution in the way skis are designed and the technology behind them. One of the main innovations that's instrumental to modern ski design is the idea that the ankle of the skier is sort of held in a fixed position. You can't flex your ankles back and forth while you're strapped to a ski. And the reason for this is because early skis, like the picture shown on the left here, only had a strap around the toe. So your ankles would be free to move, and you just had the toe strap that was connecting you to the ski. This is fine and comfortable for navigating flat terrain, but the minute you get to downhill terrain or terrain where you need to turn, it's very hard to keep a grip from your foot onto the ski. So the innovation was pretty simple, but it was that you create boots that are going to anchor your ankle in place to the ski such that your ankle is fixed to the plane of the ski and you can't flex it around and move around too much. Now, the second innovation, which isn't really about the skis, but more about the ski resorts, was the invention of the gondola, or these chair lifts that we see in modern ski resorts. And this might seem obvious, but for a long time, many people were not able to do downhill skiing for very long or for very frequent amounts of time because they simply didn't have the energy to walk all the way back up the hill. And so this really limited the scope of the sport and how popular it became among recreational crowds. But once these gondolas were invented, it made it a lot more accessible and a lot more fun for skiers to just go back up the hill without expending any effort like that. And this is a famous ski resort in Europe, I think, from a Bond movie that I found online. Now, the other evolution of skis is the design and the shape of the skis themselves. So the earliest skis were just flat pieces of wood, essentially, that were just planks that you would put on the ground. And you'd maybe polish them to make them low friction. But one of the major innovations was the introduction of camber, or this arch to the ski. And the reason this was done is because when you have this bow to the ski shape itself, it helps you distribute the weight of the skier onto the ski much better, which improves balance and stability when you're going on these turns. And the other improvement that ski designers came up with is this idea of metal edge skis on the right here. So previously skis were either wooden or plastic and they just had one uniform material, but the introduction of these metal edges on the sides made them very easy to turn when you're skiing downhill, because in a very colloquial way, the way I'll put it is that the metal is just slicing through the snow. So it helps you grip the snow from the side. And this isn't really visible on modern skis unless you look at the very edges because they're only covered with logos and everything, but it really makes a big difference when trying to navigate sharp turns on a downhill. The next thing I want to talk about is some of the techniques in skiing that I personally learned last weekend. So everyone starts out in skiing learning this thing of stopping with a wedge. So you tilt your skis inward to create friction against the snow, and it brings you to a stop. And you can use the same wedge concept to turn because all you're doing is essentially turning one of the skis inward relative to the other, and that friction will move you rotationally so that you can turn along the path. And this is very similar to the way that boats turn using rudders, where they direct the drag of the water against the plane of the rudder to steer the boat like that. Now, wedge turns are fun and easy when you start out, but they're pretty terrifying at faster speeds, as I learned the hard way. Because when you try and do a wedge turn at high speeds, the ski can dig into the ground more than you want it to, in which case you just end up flipping and you might tumble down the hill like I ended up doing the first time. So the better way to turn once you start gathering more speed is something called a parallel turn, where you actually lean more than you turn the skis, and you turn both the skis in the same direction rather than a wedge turn where one of the skis is turned and the other one is relatively straight. And the analogy I like to give here is when you first learn how to ride a bike and you have training wheels, you don't turn by leaning. You turn by just moving the handlebars. But once you take off those training wheels, if you try and do that at higher speeds, you'll lose control of the bike. So instead, you lean with the bike and help move the bike in that direction with your body weight. But the same thing applies with parallel turns. And this is as far as I got, which was actually pretty sufficient for most of the trails that I saw. But I was reading about some more advanced techniques, and here are just a couple of them. So the first one is called an airplane turn, which I guess is called an airplane turn because the skier is so far tilted from the vertical axis that they look like the wing of a plane. But the airplane turn is really crucial for really high speed, high lateral acceleration turns where you really dig into the snow almost horizontally and keep your legs spaced apart enough where you really create that force against the snow itself. And this is pretty commonly seen in slalom courses where skiers need to navigate these turns very, very precisely. The other technique is called telemark skiing, which is this idea that one of the skis is placed behind the other. So when you're turning, you sort of purposely create drag on the inner ski and you let the outer ski go ahead. And this helps you turn about that axis, which is actually very similar to the way that a lot of cars today have these torque vectoring systems. I don't know if you've heard of them, but the way they work is they break the inside wheel and they apply power to the outside wheel, which helps the car rotate more easily around a turn and grip it when you're applying a lot of steering input. So I just think it's cool how the physics of skiing relates very closely to the physics of biking or driving a car, because the mechanics of weight transfer and grip along a surface are actually very similar among those. So with all that being said, this is the resort that I actually went to in Tahoe. It's called Sierra Tahoe. And the snow was actually great. We had almost 5 inches of snow, I think, land overnight on Thursday night to Friday morning. And it made for some very interesting powdery conditions on Friday, along with blizzard-like conditions on the actual slopes where you'd see snow just flying into your face. But it's a pretty large size resort, and I thought it was a very good value for the experience itself. When I bought the tickets online, it was about $65 per day for me. And if you're above the age of 23, because somehow that's the cutoff, it's $75. But compared to other resorts, I actually think that's much cheaper for the same kind of experience you get here. So I'd highly recommend checking out Sierra if you ever go to Tahoe. And finally, this is just a map of Sierra where they have, I'm just including this to show that they have many levels of difficulty along the resort. So I started out on these green trails in the center here, which are these really mildly sloped, easy trails to navigate. And eventually I moved up to the blue trails, which are more steep and narrow. But I just wanted to shout out Sierra specifically because I thought it was a very well-designed course to learn how to ski and also gradually build confidence rather than some of the other resorts, which just throw you in the deep end and expect you to pick up skills pretty quickly. Anyway, I think skiing is a very interesting sport with a pretty interesting history. And if any of you are excited to check it out, I highly recommend it. Thanks.